The air inside the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia felt heavy, almost too thick to breathe. The rows of wooden benches were packed with spectators, murmuring among themselves as a peculiar courtroom drama began to unfold. At the defense table stood Marcus Ellison, 22 years old, hands in his pockets, chin lifted with quiet defiance. He looked out of place, too young and too calm for someone facing charges of grand theft auto and obstruction of justice. But the real tension didn't come from the charges. It came from the way Judge Raymond Lancaster stared down at Marcus, lips curled in amused contempt. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" Lancaster asked, leaning back, his fingers lazily drumming the bench. The courtroom chuckled. Even the bailiff and the stenographer exchanged smirks. The prosecutor, Paul Redmond, let out a short, smug laugh. But Marcus didn't so much as flinch. He had prepared for this. Not exactly this, but something like it. He never expected to stand in front of a judge as a defendant, but he'd spent years studying courtrooms. While other kids were chasing football scholarships, Marcus was studying criminal procedure. His mother, Tanya Ellison, had worked as a legal secretary for 2 decades. He had grown up hearing stories of overworked defenders, lazy prosecutors, and judges who picked sides before trials began. By 15, he could recite case law better than some law students. But that didn't matter now, not to Judge Lancaster, who had already decided Marcus was just another inner-city kid with a bad attitude. "Let's keep it moving," Lancaster muttered, flipping open the file in front of him. "I've got tea time at 3. The gallery chuckled again, but this time Marcus let a subtle smirk tug at the corner of his mouth. The judge had just made his first mistake, and nobody noticed. Not yet. Prosecutor Paul Redmond rose like a man giving a sermon he'd delivered 100 times before. His navy suit was immaculate, his voice loud and practiced. "Your Honor," he began, "the state intends to show that Marcus Ellison was found behind the wheel of a 2023 BMW 5 Series, reported stolen earlier that morning. Atlanta PD officers initiated pursuit when the vehicle was spotted on Peachtree Street. After a short chase, the defendant allegedly fled on foot and was arrested minutes later. His fingerprints were recovered on the steering wheel. The evidence, I believe, speaks for itself." The statement hung in the air like a hammer. A few jurors exchanged glances. The gallery leaned in. Judge Lancaster peered over his glasses at Marcus again, then turned back to Redmond. "Continue." Redmond moved closer to the jury box, his leather shoes clicking on the tile. Now, the defense may try to claim this was a misunderstanding, that Mr. Ellison was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But let's be honest here. What kind of innocent man runs from the police? For the first time, Redmond turned and locked eyes with Marcus. Marcus didn't blink. Redmond looked back at the judge. "Your Honor, I'd also like to submit the written testimony of Officer Brian Keller, who claims he personally observed the defendant behind the wheel before the pursuit began. Officer Keller's account confirms the arrest was handled by the book, with no procedural violations." Judge Lancaster exhaled slowly through his nose. To everyone in that courtroom, this seemed like an open and shut case. But not to Marcus. Because Marcus knew something they didn't. The fingerprints? He had an explanation. The officer's testimony? He'd found discrepancies. And as he watched the smug expressions in that room, he wasn't nervous. He was ready. Because while they thought they were dealing with a clueless defendant, they were actually facing someone who had studied their playbook cover to cover. And the moment he opened his mouth, they'd realize this wasn't going to be a quick conviction. It was going to be a lesson for all of them. Nodding might have seemed like a straightforward gesture, and to most people in the courtroom, the case probably did seem just that, clear-cut. A stolen car, a police chase, an arrest. But Marcus Ellison, a 22-year-old standing trial inside Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, had spent too many years studying trials not to spot the cracks. He stayed silent though, watching, waiting. Judge Raymond Lancaster tapped his gavel lightly. All right, let's hear the defense's response. He turned toward the defense table where Marcus's public defender, Samantha Blake, had barely said more than a few awkward words since the trial began. She stood up, clutching her notepad. Your Honor, my client... Marcus placed a steady hand on her arm, a silent request. She paused, unsure. Then, slowly, she sat back down. For the first time since the case began, Marcus spoke. I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. The entire courtroom froze. Silence rippled across the room. Lancaster blinked, clearly caught off guard. You'll what? The judge asked, half laughing. Marcus's voice was calm, unwavering. I'll be defending myself. A wave of murmurs buzzed through the gallery. The bailiff arched a brow. Prosecutor Paul Redmond's smirk faltered, just for a second, before he chuckled under his breath. This should be good, Redmond muttered. But no one was laughing when Marcus took a step forward, because something in his demeanor shifted the air. The weight of the room settled around him, his posture steady, his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch, just enough to stir discomfort. Then he spoke again. Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution. Redmond folded his arms. Go ahead. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step toward the jury box. You said Officer Brian Keller personally witnessed me behind the wheel of the stolen BMW before I was arrested, correct? Redmond rolled his eyes, already sounding bored. That's correct. It's in the official police report. Marcus nodded once, then turned to face Judge Lancaster. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony. Lancaster raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Marcus removed his hands from his pockets for the first time, gesturing calmly toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Keller never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began. A flicker of confusion passed across Redmond's face. What are you talking about? Marcus stepped forward again. Your Honor, if the court permits, I'd like to request Officer Keller's GPS log from that night. If he claims to have seen Lee driving, his location history should place him at the scene. He let the words hang in the air. But I have a strong feeling it won't. Now, the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Lancaster frowned and looked toward Redmond. The prosecutor's jaw clenched. That report was filed by an officer of the law, Your Honor. Are we really taking the word of a defendant over a trained professional? Marcus offered a small shrug. If Keller was where he says he was, the GPS will prove it. If not, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Lancaster studied Marcus for a long, tense beat, then turned to Redmond. Does the prosecution have an issue verifying Officer Keller's GPS log? Redmond hesitated. It was brief, but long enough. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Marcus inhaled quietly. He had spent years watching courtrooms, watching prosecutors, studying how they operated, the tactics, the missteps, the performances. One thing he knew for certain: if Redmond was confident in his case, he wouldn't be hesitating. Lancaster sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Counselor? Redmond finally shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already begun. The courtroom, once filled with laughter, was now dead silent, except for the tension thickening in the air. Redmond shuffled his papers, that confident polish starting to crack around the edges. Your Honor, Redmond said, trying to steady himself, while we await those records, the fact remains. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Marcus nodded. That's true. He took another step forward, voice still cough. But let's take a closer look at that evidence. Judge Lancaster gestured for him to proceed. Marcus turned toward the jury box, making direct eye contact with each juror. The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints on a car automatically means I stole it. He paused. But here's what they're not telling you. But let's think about this logically, Marcus Ellison said, keeping his tone calm and measured. He took a breath and looked toward the jury. Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and leave. Hours later, someone shoplifts that same jacket. Would your fingerprints on it automatically mean you stole it? A few jurors exchanged uncertain glances. Someone in the gallery muttered under their breath. Marcus didn't give them time to recover. The BMW in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven nearly 4 hours before it was reported stolen. I was inside that store with 3 friends. When we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door. It was unlocked. He paused. I didn't drive it. I didn't take anything from inside. I didn't steal it. It was just a dumb moment of curiosity. He let that sit for a beat. Then his voice sliced through the silence. Does touching something make you a criminal? Prosecutor Paul Redmond cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, clearly searching for a way to regain control of the narrative. Marcus wasn't done. And since we're talking about fingerprints, let's talk about the fingerprint analysis itself. He turned toward Judge Raymond Lancaster, who looked increasingly uncomfortable behind the bench. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist who handled the fingerprint evidence subpoenaed to testify in court? Lancaster blinked, caught off guard by the question. He turned to Redmond. Redmond hesitated. No, Your Honor. Marcus gave a slow nod. So, let me get this straight. The state is leaning on forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was important to bring in the person who actually processed that evidence? His voice remained steady, but the weight of his words landed hard. No chance for me to cross-examine. No way to ask about the chain of custody. No opportunity to challenge the methodology or accuracy. Redmond's jaw flexed. Marcus tilted his head, like he had just confirmed what he already knew. Interesting. Judge Lancaster let out a long breath and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man realizing the case he thought would be a routine conviction was crumbling in front of him. But Marcus wasn't finished, because what he said next would change everything. Your Honor, he said, stepping forward again, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Lancaster frowned. The owner? Marcus nodded. Yes. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen BMW, provided a statement to the police. That statement, for some reason, was never submitted in the prosecution's filings. He turned sharply toward Redmond. And I think I know why. Redmond's face tensed. He knew what was coming. Marcus didn't wait for permission. He pulled a printed transcript from his folder and began reading aloud. I left my car running when I ran into the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Marcus held up the page. That's from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Lancaster. The arresting officer left this out of his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Redmond stepped forward, scrambling to regain ground. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. Marcus shook his head, not raising his voice, but cutting straight through the courtroom's growing tension. No, I wasn't. He spoke the words slowly, with razor clarity. I was arrested 4 blocks away from where the car was found. I was walking home with snacks and my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near it. I wasn't running from anyone. He faced the jury again. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions." Judge Lancaster sighed and rubbed his temple. The case was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Marcus stepped forward one final time. The real suspect got away that night, but instead of following leads, the officers found a black kid in the general area and decided that was close enough. He turned to the jury, locking eyes with them one by one. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Judge Lancaster looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Redmond had stopped flipping through papers. The gallery was still. Because in that moment, nobody saw Marcus Ellison as just a defendant anymore. They saw the truth. Judge Raymond Lancaster cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" Prosecutor Paul Redmond looked stiff, his jaw tight and his face flushed. "No, Your Honor." Lancaster exhaled slowly, glancing at Marcus Ellison for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned to the jury, his fingers tightening around the gavel. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would echo in that room for years. "Case dismissed." A stunned beat of silence fell. Then, chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. Reporters scrambled to scribble notes, cameras clicked furiously. The gallery stirred, whispering and shifting in their seats. Marcus didn't move right away. He stood still, letting the moment settle, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. Judge Lancaster remained seated, still gripping his gavel. His face was unreadable, but there was something new in his eyes. Not amusement, not doubt, recognition, maybe even regret. Marcus met his gaze, gave a small nod, and turned toward the courtroom doors. But just as he reached them, Lancaster's voice called out again, "Mr. Ellison!" Marcus paused but didn't turn around. The judge hesitated, then said, "You should consider law school." A slow smirk tugged at Marcus's lips. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with voices and the hum of news vans. Reporters swarmed the steps, their microphones thrust forward like spears, cameras flashing in bursts of white light. "Marcus, did you expect the judge to dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a state prosecutor?" Marcus pulled his hoodie up, eyes on the ground, ignoring the noise. This wasn't about proving he was smart. It was about something bigger. At the bottom of the steps, his mother, Denise Ellison, stood waiting. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then she shook her head and exhaled. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Marcus chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She stared at him a second longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. "You always were the stubborn one." Behind them, the cameras kept flashing, reporters kept yelling, but none of it mattered anymore. Across the street, leaning against his black sedan, Judge Lancaster watched quietly. His posture was different now, no longer rigid with authority, but softened, reflective. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew better, because Marcus Ellison had done something most never could. He'd forced the system to look at itself. And for once, it blinked first. This wasn't just about one kid beating one case. It was about all the cases that didn't get this ending. How many people had been convicted not because they were guilty, but because of bias, because shortcuts were taken, because the system cared more about closing a file than uncovering the truth. Marcus had the knowledge to fight back. But what about the ones who didn't? This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in. But next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you pause, even for a second, share it. Because the justice system is made of laws, but run by people. And people can change, but only if we make them. The story of Marcus Ellison teaches us a powerful truth. Justice isn't automatic. It must be demanded, defended, and questioned. Marcus, a 22-year-old wrongly accused, showed that knowledge can be the most effective weapon in the fight against injustice. His calm, deliberate approach in court dismantled a case built on assumptions and shortcuts. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was exposing flaws in a system that too often values convictions over, but what happens to those who don't know how to speak up, who don't understand their rights, or who lack the confidence to challenge authority? Marcus's case ended in justice, but it reminds us that for many, the outcome is far different. The lesson is clear. We must educate ourselves and others. We must demand accountability from our legal system. And we must never accept close enough when it comes to someone's freedom. Marcus didn't just win a case. He sparked a conversation about bias, about power, about change. Let this story be a reminder. One voice, when informed and courageous, can make the system blink. Because true justice starts when ordinary people refuse to be silenced. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Marcus, it might be someone you know.